Hello, I'm Rafe Foreman, and along with Chris Stoy, we're two of the Warriors for Justice, and today we're going to talk about privileges. You know, some people are under the idea that certain things are privileged and cannot be discoverable in a lawsuit. And I'd like to talk to you about some of those privileges. First of all, there's the doctor-patient privilege. There is the parishioner-priest privilege. There is the husband-wife privileges, and there's a whole bunch of other privileges.
Attorney-client.
Attorney-client privilege. We're going to talk about privileges and whether they actually protect privileged information from being discovered.
Yeah.
Now, for example, let's say, Chris, that we have a plaintiff in a car wreck case who has suffered some pain and suffering and some mental anguish, and they have a psychological history with a psychologist. That's certainly privileged and not able to be discovered. Wouldn't you agree?
False. No. Because you're claiming mental anguish damages, the defense is entitled to do a little digging into where you were before the wreck, right? So to get a baseline of what your psychological profile was before the wreck. Were you suffering severe depression, severe anxiety? And if so, what is it now? You know, what have you reported to your counselor now? It can be a bit intrusive, and I've had many clients be concerned about them digging into those records. But if you're claiming mental anguish, they're entitled to go do a little digging. Now, not too far, you know, and nothing too remote. I think anything over 7 to 10 years is kind of out of the question, but they can get a history for sure.
You mean they can get the counseling records that a client tells a psychologist?
Yes. And if you don't mind, I'd like to give a little story about something I've seen with a client before and why it's so important that you talk to us about those counselor records. And I had a client who was having an affair on her husband and mentioned that in the counseling records and then never told me, so I didn't object to the counseling records being provided to the defense. Well, then the defense gets those records, and though this is really not permissible, they basically use that as a way to try to squeeze my client into taking a settlement because they basically claim that they insinuate that they're going to disclose this affair in front of the client's husband later on at trial.
That's scary. What you bring up kind of makes me reflect on a couple of episodes we've already done on what a lawyer can do for you. And one of the things a lawyer can do for you is protect you, but not if we don't know what's coming. And so you've got to be honest, you've got to be open, and in order to win your case, you've got to be truthful with your lawyer and let us know the good, bad, and the ugly about your situation.
Right. In that case, I would have probably obtained those records and forced the defense lawyer and myself to go in front of the judge and ask the judge to do an in-camera review where the judge looks at the documents before the defense lawyer does and either redacts information or says, you know what, these have nothing to do with her mental or emotional state. These are just going to be used for harassment, and he probably would have kept them out.
Yeah, well, now surely they don't have to give over their tax returns. Those are privileged, aren't they?
Those are not privileged. You're claiming lost wages, aren't you?
Well, gosh, do you mean they can get my tax returns?
They can get pretty much anything depending on what you're claiming. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it shows your tax base and you're entitled to, you know, income, but they've got to have a way of determining what your past income was.
How about if I told my wife it was probably my fault?
Spousal privilege. Golly, the rule on that is very confusing to me. I'm going to let you explain that one.
Well, and it is very confusing, and it's applied differently across the nation depending on what court you're in, because each state has an opportunity to enact their own privilege. Here in Texas, the privilege belongs to the husband and the wife. And now I want to talk to you about the evil of waiver. You see, if the wife wants to confess that you have told her that it's probably your fault, there might be a little trouble on the horizon for that marriage.
Why so? Y'all, Rafe was taught evidence at law school for a long time, so his knowledge of evidence is supreme to mine. So I'm a little intrigued right now, but remind me, there's something about the holder of the privilege and all that.
The holder and the occupier of the privilege is the person who can assert the privilege for his own protection. If your wife is going to come harpoon your lawsuit, there's trouble in paradise.
She can do that?
Well, she can do that if she wants to, because she is a person who occupies and holds the privilege. The whole purpose of the privilege is to protect the relationship, the husband and wife relationship. If you and your wife are at odds and she's going to say, you confess to me that this wreck is your fault, there is nothing to protect. That marriage is already destroyed, and therefore it's probably going to be gone. But I want to talk to you about attorney-client privilege.
Okay.
Because you're often going to want to bring your mom, your aunt, your uncle, whoever to the consultation and get a second, have them evaluate whether or not you want to hire the Warriors for Justice. We may have to ask for mom and dad and aunt and uncle to leave the room because we don't want to waive the privilege. We want to protect that attorney-client relationship and not allow it to be waived and discoverable, because you should be encouraged to tell us this may be our fault and not have us be required to confess that in a court of law, because you told us that in client-attorney confidence.
Right.
And we're going to protect that very zealously and not waive it.
So, for example, if you're my client and you and I are having a conversation, all that is privileged, right?
As long as you don't have third parties.
Yeah, and that was where I was going to go.
Yeah.
Is if, for example, we brought in an expert to talk with you, and you and I are still having a conversation, but the expert's sitting there, we now no longer have the attorney-client privilege. Is that accurate?
Well, experts are a special case. Experts can be exempted from the rule and you not waive the privilege. So can your paralegal, so can your office staff. An expert is now part of the law firm. And so if the expert is engaged by us and is working on our team, that doesn't waive the privilege. Just like the paralegal and the secretary doesn't waive the privilege. But your mother, your father, your spouse, maybe not, but your aunt and uncle could waive the privilege because they can be subpoenaed and be brought to court and be caused to tell what was said in their presence.
Yeah, and so in real world application, we don't see a lot of, oh my gosh, that privilege was waived. But I think what I'm hearing from you is a general rule. If you've got something really, really, really important that you think that like you want to keep, or you want to ensure that there's attorney-client privilege, it should be only you and the attorney in the room.
That's exactly right, which brings me up the segue of why I wanted to talk to you about waiver and privilege. I don't have my cell phone here, but let me tell you, anything on this cell phone that's put out on the public airways is not privileged. That includes your medical records, that includes your tax return, that includes your private conversations, your text, your emails, your Facebook posts. Anything you put on this little device here and send it out on the airways, you have waived the privilege. And it's litigation yet to come as to whether or not your medical records, because for example, I have medical records with Texas Tech University Health Science Center. Those are available to me via the internet. Have I waived the privilege? Stay tuned. There will be litigation over that to come. Not in my case, but in some case in the future. I see we're out of time today, Chris, so let's wrap up privileges by saying don't waive them. My name's Rafe Foreman.
I'm Chris Stoy.
We're the Warriors for Justice, and we thank you for tuning in.
Thanks.